Hello, BookTube. I was recently watching a video on the BookTube channel Critical Dragon, which is part of Fantasy BookTube. It's part of the hidden kingdom of Fantasy BookTube that is encompassed all around with the girdle of Melian. I've mentioned this hidden kingdom many, many times. They are not like the rest of BookTube. They almost don't associate with the rest of BookTube at all, and they have their own bizarro world alternate versions of BookTube all throughout their ecosystem. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I've watched more and more of their channels. Most of the people in Fantasy BookTube don't read anything but fantasy, or very little other than that. Most of them support indie authors rather aggressively, and I yearn to be accepted by that fantasy kingdom. I yearn to be accepted by them. I yearn to know their dark midnight rituals. I yearn to be one of them. Even though they don't do tags, they don't do any of the usual stuff that BookTube does, almost never. And seem only to communicate with each other and a handful of very special ambassadors to the rest of YouTube. Like, for instance, David Wiley. They all like David Wiley, but where isn't David Wiley liked? But ambassadors like that are very rare. They're very rare. And I yearn to be one of them. I was recently watching a video in that fantasy realm, a video by Critical Dragon, who's a channel that I've praised many times, responded to a few times. Always very thoughtful, always very thought-provoking. And in this latest video, I'll leave a link to it down below, AP talks about a phenomenon of which I was largely ignorant before I watched his video, which is the existence of subreddits and wikis and fan groups of all kinds designed to help lazy fantasy readers to cheat at getting a leg up on the works that they're reading. So to listen to AP talk about it, somebody starts an 800-page book one of a 4-book series in epic fantasy, and on page 80, the beginning of chapter 3, they're not understanding everything. Hints are being dropped, foreshadowing is being made, but there are pieces missing, lots and lots of pieces missing, and that's bothering the little souls. So they go on these wikis or these subreddits and ask people to explain everything to them. Explain to me what hasn't yet been explained to me by the book. I don't want to keep just toiling along, learning bits and pieces here and there. I did not know that such communities existed, not at all. And I looked around after I watched AP's video, and they definitely do exist. And in his video, he, once again, as he always does, calls for his listeners to follow the advice of their better angels, the good angel and the bad angel, one on each shoulder. He's always asking his readers to follow the advice of their better angels and to have patience. His video is all about patience. Have patience and don't consult those things. I mean, he makes a point of stressing that there's no right or wrong way to do all this. And in this particular instance, I think he may be being too generous. I think he's often too generous. But then again, I'm kind of a vengeful sod, aren't I? He suggests to his viewers that you not do that. That you have a little patience instead. Exercise a little patience for the work you're reading, especially if it's immense and the writer took enormous amounts of pains to make it complex. And I was agreeing the whole time. The minute I became aware of what these things are, I wanted people to shun them. Absolutely, I want people to shun them, even though the ones that I looked at the people on them seem fairly conscientious. They are, the ones that I've looked at, I haven't been at exhaustive study by any means, but the ones that I've looked at, some of the people on those Reddits and discussion forums express irritation. When people come in and ask those kinds of questions, they say, why don't you just wait? Why don't you just keep reading? Some of them also express a little bit of impatience when a person comes in and says, I'm only on chapter 6. I don't know everything yet. I want you to tell me all that I need to know, but don't spoil the book for me. It's like, are you reading this on your own or are you not? And if you want the guts provided to you and you'll finish up with the skin and the hair later on, why should anyone respect that? And I saw a lot of irritation delivered towards readers like that. So I was agreeing with AP's video for a huge amount of its length. The only way that I disagreed is the reason for this video. And it's not a disagreement in content. It's a disagreement in good old-fashioned Christian values. Because AP is very forgiving, and I am not. He makes his video without actually blaming anyone for anything, which makes me think that he's not actually a South Boston Irish Catholic at all. Because what kind of a way is that to go through life? So I wanted, for my response video, to ladle out a little blame, because there's a lot to go around here. I'm going to leave aside for the moment any blame that accrues to those wikis and those discussion sites. I don't myself think they should exist. If that's the function that they're going, a function that they're going to fill, I think they should draw a hard line in the sand and tell everybody, all newcomers, we're not going to do this. You're either going to get the whole work spoiled because we, the fans of it, want to talk about it amongst ourselves, or we're going to ignore your questions asking us to give you X, Y, and Z solution, but not A, B, and C part of the book. They don't, as far as I know, do that except on an individual basis, and they should. But I'm not going to ladle blame on them. I'm going to save my blame for the two categories that come up in AP's video, the reader and the writer. Now, if a writer is writing a huge work, let's say epic fantasy, because this Lothlorien, this kingdom surrounded by the girdle of Melian, this kingdom of fantasy booktube, they almost exclusively read fantasy. Almost exclusively. It's 99%. So if we stick to fantasy, the writer of a fantasy series who is dolloping out information in little increments instead of huge info dumps, presumably that author is in control of what they're doing. In terms not only of how small the dollops of information are, but also the skill with which they are dispensed. So it's not, if they're creating impatience in you, the reader, it should be artfully done. You should be feeling that impatience and also reveling that feeling. Reveling the feeling of wanting to know more. AP says in his video that probably the quintessential driver of any story is what happens next. That's true. And one of the quintessential arts of storytelling is to make your listener feel that without making them want to stop what they're doing and go to some wiki in order to figure out what happens next. You want to have them caught up not only in the incremental dispensement of information, but also in the art of that teasing them along. There's an art to that, I think. So, for instance, if we were to let's use an example that the little fantasy kingdom inside the girdle of Melian will immediately recognize. John Gwynne, the fantasy author John Gwynne. He has two epic works sort of drawn from Norse mythology that are out now. I think a third volume is still contemplated. And in those books, though his latest big fantasy novels, there is a very skillful deployment of gradual enlightenment for the reader and the characters in the story. It's very skillfully done. Obviously with complete control. And it works. It's one of the many thrilling aspects of the Hunger of the Gods series is that you feel like you are a fish hooked on a line and you don't want to be let go. You want to keep learning as you go along and guessing and having guesses confirmed and then denied and whatnot. In a situation like that, if you're reading a book like that and you're still saying, come on, I want to know the reason for this tease that you're giving me, and then you're not going to pick it up again for 2 chapters. No, I want to know now what this is. I want to know right now. AP refers to a famous character from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And he isn't happy with that behavior. Calls it a function of the modern era. He's absolutely right about that. But he stops short of excoriating with soul-crushing blame. And I want to do that. If you are in the hands of a storyteller like John Gwynne, who is clearly in control of the fact that you don't know everything right away, and you're feeling that control, and you still are bratty enough to say, no, I'm going to drop what I'm doing, even though I'm enjoying reading. I'm going to stop reading. I'm going to go to a wiki. I'm going to have everything explained to me. Then you are a bad reader. Then you are to blame for that, and you should stop doing that. You should change who you are so that you don't do that anymore. This is where the blame attaches there. And then there's also blame for the writer if the writer doesn't do it well, as plenty of them don't. One of the ironies of the fact that I am not accepted by the little fantasy kingdom inside the girdle of Melian is that I read a lot of fantasy. And I'd be willing to bet, not that it's a contest, but I'd be willing to bet that I've read more fantasy in my life than any of the people who are in this fantasy realm, this cloistered fantasy realm of BookTube that accepts no newcomers. I think my credentials are good. I think the thing that causes them to, have all their archers ready at the border is that I don't only talk about fantasy on this channel. I think I would need to do that. I would need to rededicate this channel only to fantasy, and then maybe they would accept me. I feel like I'm on the periphery, like Jane Goodall. Yeah, I'm observing the chimps of Gombe, but they haven't accepted me yet. Or Diane Fossey. I'm waiting until I get the chance. The privilege of a lifetime would be that suddenly Philip Chase is okay with me grooming him for lice or whatever their rituals are. I don't know. All I know is they seem extremely xenophobic. To the point where when I go to a hard and fast, deep high council member of this fantasy network, if I watch one of their videos and just love it and I enthusiastically leave a comment without really thinking about where I am, it's the exclusiveness, the girdle of Melian is to such an extent that oftentimes the outsider's comment in the comments field will be the only one that's not responded to. And I want that to change. I want these people to accept me. But as I was saying, I read a lot of fantasy, a huge amount of fantasy in any given year. I read all the major new releases in the American book market in fantasy, for one, but I read a ton of other stuff too. And oh my God, when it comes to backlist, when it comes to older books, oh my God, it's limitless. And I can attest, because of that fact, that authors are often to blame here. They often do that dolloping out of that teasing of the reader in a boring or tedious way. As, for instance, a campfire storyteller will do. If you've ever been out hiking or camping at night and you haven't been killed by a bear or a Sasquatch, and you have storytelling by the campfire, you'll know right away what I'm talking about. Some people are really good at it, and some people aren't. Simple as that. And it stands to reason in this, as in any human skill, that more people are bad at it than are good at it by a wide margin. So in the case of a fantasy author who is dolloping out the information but making the reader want to go to a wiki, that's the author's fault. The author should be blamed for that. And they should be excoriated for it until they either pick up a new profession or get better at the one they have. Mollycoddling authors with soft gloves is a waste of everybody's time. All you're doing when you do that is inflicting a bad author on another generation down the line, because no one handled them roughly when it was a chance that you could fix what they were doing. So don't do that. Is one side note here. But my main point here is that AP is right. Of course he's right here, that you should listen to the better angels of your nature and have patience. But sometimes the author is not warranting the patience. A lot of the people in this closed off little fantasy kingdom that I yearn to join them. I want them to accept me. I don't care how many of my normal BookTube friends I have to disavow in order to be allowed into the kingdom. I'll go in blindfolded. The people in that fantasy kingdom, that fantasy subset of BookTube, read a lot of fantasy that isn't good. And the one worry that I have with that little kingdom is a lot of the fantasy they read that isn't good is written by people who are also in that network of channels. And you're always a little bit reluctant. Most people are obviously a little bit reluctant to excoriate the flaws of a book written by a friend. Most people don't want to do that. I make a point. I've been a critic for a long time, so I make a point with writers that I know that, look, that has to be off the table. We can disagree about a whole bunch of other things. We can fall out or become closer on a whole bunch of different axes, but that is off the table. There's no way that I'm going to ignore your writing, and there's no way that I'm going to praise it if it's not praiseworthy, just because you're sitting across from me having wine and calzones. We have to understand that first of all. Once we get through, that shouldn't be a problem, because my profession is a critic, and your profession is a writer. If you mean what you say when you say that's your profession, and I certainly mean it when I say it, then we should both be perfectly okay with your work being fair game, and still have you able to come over here for wine and calzones. So that might be a problem, a little bit of inbreeding, But the element that I wanted to add to Critical Dragon's video, I'll leave a link to it. It's a really good discussion. Well worth your time to subscribe to his channel. The note that I wanted to add here is a note of invidious personal blame because he's not going to do it. He's too nice. He's too nice and he's too mild-mannered to do it. So I will do it. That if a reader does that, if they hair off to a wiki or a fan site because they're a little bit impatient with the fact they don't know everything there is to know that this author has spent years inventing, then that reader needs to change. They need to start listening to the better angel of their nature and stop being a gigantic wad of turd. And the same thing with the writer. If the writer is dolloping things out in a very poor, inept way, a way that is boring, they need to change or get out of the profession. The key here being that simply dolloping out little bits of information at a time instead of dumping everything is not in itself a thing that necessarily will make a reader bored. That can be done really well. That process can be done really well. The writer can be playing on the joy that you are feeling at not knowing everything. That kind of impatience can be a lot of fun. As any of you will ever know if you have read a chapter-by-chapter potboiler to a small child. They want to know what's going to happen next, but they will scream bloody murder if you tell them. They want to know, but they also want to be caught on a hook. If you're a skilled writer at doing that, your reader will feel that way. And if you're not a skilled writer at doing that, you ought to become skilled at doing it. Okay. Anyway, that's a little around the all over the place response to AP's video, and of course, a portrait of me forlornly gazing through the girdle of Melian at the forbidden kingdom I am not yet been invited to enter. Maybe someday I'm gonna go read a fantasy novel right now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.